This is Transformation Ground Control, your source for all things business, technology, strategy, and change. If you're growing your business, leading change within your organization, or undertaking any sort of operational or technology change initiative, this podcast is for you. This show covers what you need to know about digital transformation, organizational change, operational improvement, and business growth.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
Hello and welcome to Transformation Ground Control, your podcast about change, strategy, digital transformation, business transformation, any sort of change your organization might be going through. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm here with Paresa and Noble. Paresa, welcome back to the show.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, we're excited to have a couple guests on today. We're excited for today's show, as we always are. We love talking about this stuff. We have a couple guests. One is Stuart Robb, our Vice President of Europe, Third Stage Europe. And he's going to be on the show later talking about some of the emerging technologies within digital transformation. So things like machine learning, robotics, artificial intelligence, all that good stuff, all that stuff that we hear about in the buzzwords, and talk about the practical application and the reality of where those technologies are. So we're excited to have him on the show later today. And before we have him on the show, we're going to have Dan Krug, who is the Vice President of IT and Talent Management at Nucor Steel, which is a client of Third Stages. And we've been partnering together for a few years now on their transformation and helping them in a number of different ways. And I'm excited to have Dan on the show. Not only is he a great guy, very interesting, very informative to talk to, but just the scope and the breadth and magnitude of their transformation is just a really good case study in terms of what to do, what not to do. And also, Nucor as an organization has a very unique culture in the way they manage their consultants and the way they manage their transformation initiatives. It's very unique and something I haven't seen before with other clients. So it's going to be fun to unpack that with Dan later. But before we get to that, just to maybe preview or set up the conversation we're going to have later with Stuart about emerging technologies. I know, Paresa, you've been doing research in this area as well, and you had some thoughts and questions around those lines as well.
Yes, well, it's interesting to see how prevalent technologies like AI are becoming, specifically within the last year or so, as companies have kind of diverted to this remote organizational structure, right? We have companies that are starting to want to monitor their employees and make sure that they're actually working. One of the articles that I recently read referred to it as a digital leash on their remote workers. And it's really utilizing things like camera monitoring, keystroke monitoring, all the way down to facial recognition tools, and different ways that that employers can really monitor and make sure that their employees are doing their job, which I find interesting because I feel like you can tell if an employee is doing their job based on their work, right? If they're meeting if they're meeting their deadlines and they're putting out what they're supposed to put out, isn't that, a metric that would work and be enough?
You would think so, but
yeah, right. I know it's definitely an interesting landscape, because even companies like Microsoft put out technologies that help define a productivity score, and it uses AI technology like this to see, how involved are their employees. And they actually got some backlash over it because, you start kind of getting into the privacy conversation. And it sounds like, just based on, for example, PwC is a company that put out a facial recognition tool for financial firms that would help them monitor and ensure that their employees are sitting at their desk and doing their job when they're supposed to be. And there's another company called Fujitsu, which developed an AI tool that recognizes how hard somebody is concentrating in a meeting or in a class by analyzing their facial muscles. Isn't that crazy? It seems a little much, don't you think?
Yeah, and I guess I didn't realize there was a universal set of muscle movements that occur when you're concentrating versus not. I had no idea. So.
I know, right? Isn't it weird? And I'm pretty sure, keep me honest, but at its core, AI is pattern recognition, right? So it's learning your face, your expressions, etc., and building out what that possibly means. Maybe you're distracted and, not paying attention at all. So it's interesting to
Yeah.
see how that's now trickling into the workforce. And I don't know, do you think it poses a liability concern for these companies if they're getting into this level of monitoring their employees?
I guess it depends on what they do with that information. I mean, if they act on it and they fire you because your facial muscles aren't functioning in a way that proves that you're concentrating, that might be more of a legal liability if you act on it in that way. I guess if they're just using it to study just how productive the overall company is and they want to try to find ways to get people more motivated or whatever, I suppose that might be okay. But I think to your point, I mean, it's one of those, it's a cultural thing too. If you want to create a culture of trust and collaboration and flexibility, that's not necessarily aligned with these technologies or vice versa. The technologies aren't aligned with that culture. But there are companies out there still. I know it's not cool, and people don't like to talk about it. And academic, researchers don't study these types of organizations, but we see it all the time. There's still a lot of companies out there that are more of that, old school command and control type of culture, and they focus on efficiency and productivity and stuff like that. And maybe in those cases, maybe it makes sense. It's kind of aligned with that culture if that's how they want to be, as they evolve as an organization. But when you think about call it like a tech startup in Silicon Valley, I can't imagine that sort of tool, even though it's cool and sounds pretty advanced from a technology perspective, I can't imagine people are going to be excited about that. If you're in that sort of a startup or a fast moving, trust based, collaboration based environment. So I think it's just a good reminder that there's a lot of technology out there, a lot of options, but they don't necessarily all need to fit your organization or your needs.
Right, exactly. I mean, this is a huge conversation around OCM. And, if you decide to implement a technology that monitors your employees, I mean, what does that imply? Like you said, I mean, it's going to probably hurt the trust or at least not move it in the right direction. So, again, it depends on your company culture, I guess. Now, if you think about it from the other side of it, if there was a company doing camera monitoring, for example, and then they not caught, but if they saw somebody else in the household on the camera, I mean, that could definitely trickle into some privacy laws, depending on which country you're in and what privacy laws. But, it's definitely testy waters right now. It seems like it's a relatively new technology. And the reports say that it was getting popular before COVID, right? It was gaining traction before COVID, and then COVID just completely, again, acted as a catalyst as we moved to a fully technology-based, operation across the board for all companies. So, I mean, with that adoption rate, you will see these types of technologies coming into play. Now, one thing I thought was interesting is that there are right to disconnect laws that have been passed in France and in Ireland. And there's people who are advocating for it in the UK. And it sets a clear line for when communication between a worker and their boss needs to stop. Now, I don't think we have anything like that in America.
Yeah, I don't think so. It's
Right.
it's more of a free for all here than in Europe.
Yeah, corporate America, I guess, right? But I mean, I'm curious to see how these types of laws will impact the use of AI and just gathering data on independent employees going forward.
Yeah, it's a definite balancing act. It sounds like a lot of organizations are going through because on one hand you've got a largely distributed remote workforce, or at the very least, even as life returns back to semi-normal for a lot of workers, I don't know that we're just going to swing back to full time 8 to 5 Monday through Friday at the office. It's probably going to be some sort of hybrid, I would imagine. So how do you the question then becomes how do you manage that, and how do you ensure productivity and that sort of thing. I've heard a lot of people, though, I don't know about you, but I've heard a lot of people say that they feel like they're more productive and cramming more into their days now that they're not commuting and they're at home, and it seems like work time is sort of bleeding into home time for a lot of people, at least people that are office jobs or the type of job where you can work remote. Of course, there's still, there were jobs that never were remote and never will be or could be just because you physically have to be there, in a manufacturing shop floor, or if you're a healthcare provider or whatever the case may be. So, But at least for those office workers that do have the option to be somewhere else, it's interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see where the pendulum swing lands, and then how technology does or doesn't fit into that, and how the cultural impact plays out there too.
Right, exactly. Because if you're in the office and then you go home, it's an on-off switch. You might check your emails on your phone or on your computer at home, but you can turn it on and off. When you're at home, it overlaps with dinner time and your once upon a time downtime that you may or may not have. But another thing too, to kind of piggyback off of what you just said is, we're kind of in a new day and age where a lot of the employment laws that are in place now were designed years and years ago, and they protect employees from, harassment, physical harm, health, safety, etc. I don't know that the data side of it and data protection and kind of the digital respect, if you will, for your employees has really made it into the baseline employment laws that we're seeing today across the world, really, with any company. So I'm curious to see, isn't it an interesting time to be alive? I mean, we're literally witnessing the fastest rate of growth in technology ever before. So it's like our cybersecurity efforts accelerating at the right rate with it, our employment laws, like I just said, accelerating at the right rate with it. It's a whole scope where we need to approach it holistically and make sure every component of our day-to-day is covered as we start pulling in these new technologies into our day-to-day as well.
Yeah, and it is interesting. It's also, in addition to that fast rate of change, or the fast pace of change with technology, it's also a good reminder of how much of an impact technology can have, not just on the traditional metrics like how efficient we are, top line revenue growth, bottom line profit, stuff like that. That's important, but it's also affecting culture in a way that systems and technologies haven't really done before. And it just seems like technology is permeating our lives so much that if you were to choose or to roll out, let's just say, a facial recognition technology at the workplace to see if you're paying attention in a meeting, it's not just about the technology and what it can do. It's also about the impact that has on your organization and the behavior and the culture and the feel. And I think a lot of times things like that can sound like a better idea than it really is, or people don't think about the unintended consequences of rolling out something like that. It's probably, I don't know how it all originated, but I imagine it's someone who just said, hey, I have a great idea. Here's a technology that could see if people are paying attention. That way companies can be more productive. So they're trying to think of it in a positive way and looking at what the positive side is. But just like a lot of technology, there's a dark side to that as well. So it's a good reminder, I suppose, that, any sort of technological initiative, you want to make sure you understand what that impact on culture and the organization really is.
Right. You said it in an interesting way, the dark side of technology.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah. There's pros and cons in everything you do. So that's the truth.
Yeah, very much so. Well, good. Well, I'm excited to talk more about that. We'll kind of build on that whole thread that you just started there, Paresa, when we have Stuart on the show here a little bit later. And it'll be good to talk to him about some of those emerging technologies, and look forward to having him on the show. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to have Dan Krug on the show. So Dan is the VP of IT at Nucor Steel. We're going to talk about his transformation, some of the lessons learned, and advice that he would give people that are going through a similar transformation. We'll be right back with more on Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology-agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. My name is Eric Kimberling. Excited for our next guest. Here to talk about their 7-year digital and business transformation journey. Although, as I'm going to talk about here with Dan in a second, those are terms that they don't commonly use to describe their journey. But I think most of us would refer to it as a business and technology transformation that they're going through. And just a really good guy that has never been on the podcast before, but we've had him at our in-person Stratosphere events in the past, and he's just a gold mine of information and wisdom and a lot of good lessons learned. And what's really interesting, too, about speaking with Dan is that he's always very open and transparent about what he does and doesn't know. So there's a lot of things he doesn't know, which you could argue is just as important as all the things he does know. And just recognizing that and knowing where to ask for help. So it's interesting also to talk to him and hear sort of where he is right now in the trenches and where his team is and the organization is as they go through their transformation. There's a lot of really good lessons there. So with all that being said, Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Just looking forward to this.
Yeah, likewise. You're always a big hit when we have you at any event. So I always appreciate your time. You're very busy. You guys have a lot going on being the industry that you're in, which I want to get to here in a second. So I know you're very busy. Your organization's very busy, given that you produce steel, and that's in high demand, I hear, right now.
That's correct. Correct. Demand is good for steel right now.
Yeah. So as we're getting settled, before I ask Dan to introduce himself, if you don't mind, I'm keeping an eye on the different streams here. So if you see me looking around, I'm looking at different devices that have the multiple streams up, and we're going to have questions here, or I'm going to encourage the audience here to ask questions. But in the meantime, if you don't mind just putting in the chat box where you're dialing in from or where you're joining us from here today, I'd love to hear, just to get a sense from where the audience is. So if you don't mind doing that, that'll help us just understand the audience a little bit better as we're getting settled and getting introduced. So while the audience is doing that, Dan, maybe just tell us a little bit, if you don't mind, maybe to start, just tell us a little bit about Nucor Steel, and then I'll ask you a little bit more about your role, just for people that may not know who Nucor is.
Sure. Yeah. Nucor is the largest producer of steel and steel products in North America. So any end market that steel would go into, our steel finds its way into. We're very diversified. So whether it's a car, a bridge, a building, furniture, hot water heater, an appliance, if it's an end market that consumes steel, we're likely in it. One of the other things that we always like to mention when we talk about ourselves is that we're North America's largest recycler as well. So oftentimes when people think of the steel industry, they think of big blast furnaces and miles of rolling mills, and that's not us. We run electric arc furnaces, which about 80% of the material that we melt is recycled steel. And we recycle over 20 million tons of steel each year that would otherwise likely go into a landfill. So given the world of sustainability that we live in, we're particularly proud of that. We've been making steel since 1969, and have had a long history as a company of not laying off teammates, paying for performance. We like to think of ourselves as a small company that just has a lot of places to it. And our culture is really, really important to us. We're a flat organization where we would hope every teammate shows up every day feeling like they have an opportunity to make a difference and change how the company operates. So I personally feel real fortunate to be a team member with this company. It's a great place to be. Yeah,
and it's interesting here. You describe it as a company that feels like a small company, and I totally agree with that. As an outsider that has sort of been outside looking in, helping you guys over the years, I would never guess, if I didn't know who you were, I would never guess that you were a Fortune 500 company, right? America's largest steel producer, one of the U.S.'s biggest companies. It just doesn't have that feel. Not that you don't have a good scalability and that sort of thing, but just the culture, I think, is a big part of it. Right. It has a very customer centric and small team feel to it, which is very unique, I think, for a company your size.
Yeah.
So
has a lot to do with the small towns that we're in. We feel like a small town company, probably.
Yeah, and you have a way of retaining that feel when you acquire companies too, which we'll come back to that point here too. So what is your role at Nucor? Maybe start off with how you started your journey, Core, and where you're at now.
Okay, so I joined the company almost 20 years ago and I was my history before Nucor was in operations and human resources. And Nucor hired me into an HR role, and I became the general manager of human resources. In 2016, my career path changed considerably, and I became the general manager of digital innovation. We are a very decentralized company, so that role really had a lot to do with leveraging a data platform to build BI and digital experiences for our customers. So I was in that role for a few years, and then consumed the overall IT function for the organization, which was really surprising to me since I did not have a technology background, but has been just a fantastic experience. I've learned so much, and it's just been a great journey. And then last year, under our new CEO, I assumed, in addition to my IT responsibilities, responsibility for talent management across the company as well. So I've got both the technology and the talent side, which is, you and I have talked a lot about, Eric. If you're engaged in technology and you're not engaged in people, it's not going to go very well. So it's an interesting combination to work across those functions in our company. And it's been a great combination, a lot of fun, more synergies than what people might think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you have such a unique background that's really well suited for that role, and I think a lot of people could learn from that. Or a lot of organizations could learn from that, and the fact that you came in whatever it was 2016, I think you said, and didn't have a bunch of IT background. I remember at the time you saying, I know very little to nothing about technology, and you were the first to admit that. And I think that actually worked to your advantage, because you didn't get sucked into some of the techno speak and the common traps that a lot of tech focused people will fall into. You were thinking of it more from a operations and a people perspective first, and then technology was just sort of something that was along for the ride that you had to learn about along the way, which I think is a really important nuance that has made you successful in this role.
Well, it didn't feel helpful at the time. It would have felt better to know more at the time, but in retrospect, I do think it was probably helpful. When you're new in a role like that, and people know that you're inexperienced, you do get to ask a lot more questions, I think, and you can ask dumber questions. And I got to ask a lot of questions about what people inside the company needed, and I asked a lot of very simple questions to our customers too. And I think a lot of those questions I asked, people were like, wow, I can't believe he's asking such a simple question. But in some cases, those simple questions were really helpful for us to think through things differently. So it was good, but it was uncomfortable. It was definitely uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to ask you a couple questions here in a second, but in the meantime, just to give you a sense of where people are joining from, they're really all over the place. We've got someone from the UK, Minnesota, Texas, Los Angeles, California. I know we've got someone from Spain here on Crowdcast. And so far on YouTube, I'm not getting a read over there on YouTube, but we've got a global audience here right now. So appreciate everyone that's joining. And feel free to chat a question at any point along the way. I'm going to keep an eye on those, and it won't interrupt us at all. And I'll sort of moderate and fire away with questions here for Dan as you guys pop them into the chat boxes here. But in the meantime, I have a few I wanted to start with just to set the context and get a feel for transformation at Nucor. And I want to focus quite a bit of time talking about the current journey you're going through, the 7-year journey you're going through now that we'll talk about. But even before that, maybe just to preface that, I think if we back up and just look at Nucor as an organization, I don't know if a lot of people know this about Nucor, but Nucor is a well-studied organization as it relates to innovation, disruption, particularly in the steel, and not just in the steel industry, but just in general, how to build a business that can be disruptive and innovative. And maybe could you talk a little bit about the whole, how Nucor really burst onto the scene, and that was it the 80s when the whole mini mill concept sort of, you guys disrupted the U.S. steel market with the mini mill concept. Maybe talk about that. And I think that leads us into this history of transformation and disruption and innovation that you guys have always had. But maybe start there if you don't mind. Just give us a little bit of history.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So that actually goes back to the 60s. We had a brand new CEO in the late 60s, and the company was a conglomerate at that time, and it was not a profitable conglomerate. And he stripped away all the pieces of the company except a steel joist plant in Florence, South Carolina. And if you don't know what a joist is, if you walk into Home Depot or Walmart and look up and you see the zigzag thing that holds the roof up, that's a joist made out of steel. And he got frustrated that he couldn't get a reliable supply of steel from the big integrated steel makers like U.S. Steel and Bethlehem. So he decided to integrate backwards, and he didn't have the capital to enter the traditional steel industry. So he used an innovation that others were unable to commercialize, and Nucor grabbed it and was able to make it work. And that's the electric arc furnace. And that's where the mini mill comes from. An electric arc furnace is what's used to make steel in what we now call a mini mill. And we were able to make all of the products that fed the joist plant, and that model expanded where you'd have more joist plants, more steel mills, sell the excess steel on the open market. And in the 80s, there were a couple other transformative innovations in very different types of steel products. One of them was around a continuous slab processor, which allowed us to enter the flat rolled steel markets. These are the big coils of steel that you would make the shells of cars from and all kinds of construction applications. That really allowed us to begin taking a lot of market share from the big integrateds. And we also levered a new technology that others were unable to use in making wide flange beams for construction. So at that point in the 80s, those innovations really launched us into a different category of steel production. And by the time we were in the early 2000s, we had surpassed all of our rivals to become the largest steel company in North America.
Wow. Yeah, and it's I forgot what the name of the book was. There's a book I read when I first heard of Nucor. There's a book about disruption. I don't know if it was Innovator's Dilemma, I want to say. Was that the one?
That's it. Yeah, Clayton Christensen wrote that book.
Clay Christensen, yeah. And he talks a lot about Nucor in that book. And
he does.
Even when I was getting my master's, I remember studying Nucor. So it's fascinating to now be working with you guys over the years and seeing how you've continued that history of innovation, disruption, challenging the status quo, that sort of thing. So maybe fast forward to the journey you're in the midst of right now, and maybe give us a little bit of context of what is this current digital transformation that you're on, and what triggered it, and what are the major components of that?
Sure. And you're using the word transformation, Eric, and that's a word that we used to use. We don't use it so much anymore, especially when it comes to digital. And the reason is when you look at what's happening to our overall business is changing. The story that I just articulated about our history, those innovations allowed our organization to have tremendous cost advantages in the marketplace. Those cost advantages led us to build an organizational structure that was really based on a very decentralized regional model, where mills ran very, very decentralized. They had their own market carved out. And, probably before 2000, those mills, if the cord was severed between that mill and Charlotte, North Carolina, they could keep running just fine. And as we got bigger and more sophisticated and began to make more sophisticated products, we became a bigger component of the steel supply chain. We began to have overlapping regions, multiple products going to the same customer, far more complex products that required a much more sophisticated approach with our customers as well. And by the time you got to 2005, 6, 7, 8, our customers were really demanding something different from us. They didn't want to work with a collection of autonomous mills. They wanted to work with a steel producer that was strategic in how we would engage them. They wanted a supply chain partner. And we didn't have a history in that. We didn't really know how to do that. So we began down a journey to really begin transforming ourselves commercially. How is it that we engage in the supply chain in a more strategic way to provide solutions rather than just commodity products? We have a more diverse offering of steel than any other producer in North America. And we also make steel products that go into construction applications that allow for solutions different than what anyone else can provide. So if you're going to take advantage of all of those synergies across your business, you got to integrate in some way. You got to create the connections to take advantage of that diversified product offering. The other thing we did is we vertically integrated. We vertically integrated both upstream and downstream raw materials, and we went deeper into downstream products like tube and grew our metal buildings business, things like that. So as the business was transforming, it became obvious that we needed a different set of information inside of the company to make decisions. Vertical integration always sounds good. It's hard. And having good information to make better decisions throughout those vertical chains matters. And as our relationships with our customers became more sophisticated, the things they were asking for from us changed and evolved. So when it comes to digital IT, business systems, ERPs, the strategy there really ended up following what the market was asking from us and what our transformation as an organization set up for us to really be able to do with our customers and in the marketplace. So we really talk about our transformation as being more of a business transformation. Digital and IT follows that. And we see it as a supporting mechanism, one of many mechanisms to actually enable the business intelligence we need inside, or to enable the customer experience that we're trying to create with our customers. Those are the drivers. Technology enables it. So it's really been a unifier in some cases of a broader strategy.
Right. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that you don't really use the word digital transformation, and you mentioned the culture. You have a unique culture, you have a strong culture. And I've learned the hard way over the years working with you guys. There's certain words that you guys just don't like. Consultants is one of them. Organizational change management, the term, not the concept, but the term. Right. Change management you guys don't like. Centralization. I think I used that word once in a meeting, and I got.
You got an instant vibe off of that, I'm sure.
Yeah, nails on a chalkboard. Do not say the word centralization here.
No, that's one we don't use too much.
But I think it's interesting because one of the challenges that you see with a lot of organizations that we do not see with Nucor is that a lot of companies don't have a clear vision of what they want to be when they grow up. Whereas you guys, for better or for worse, whether you like it or not, you guys have a very clear vision of who you are and what you're trying to be, where the warts are, what your strengths are. And I haven't really seen that level of alignment and focus from many companies over the years. And I think that's something that has served you well, not just in this journey, but just as a company overall. Would you agree with that? Or does that make it more challenging at times? Or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think, one of the things why I'm proud to be a part of the company is that the folks in our company are really dedicated to the success of our company and our customers. There's a lot of ownership. And we're a group of folks who like to win. We want our customers to win. I think our leaders are really serving the 27,000 people who want success. They feel obliged to chart a path that people can follow so that we can do it together. In a decentralized company, we have fewer structural mechanisms to tell people, here's how you do your job. So if you don't have a vision, then you really don't have an opportunity to harness energy and get people moving in the right direction. And I would say we probably view vision and communication as the mechanisms to harness energy and get people moving together, far less than structure, control, and things like that. We do have incentive systems that pay for performance that we think are very important, but we would say those really supplement the ownership towards the vision that our leaders really work towards in the organization.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
So in this journey you're in now, this business and technology transformation journey you're on now, or business transformation driven by or enabled by technology, I should say.
Right.
It sounds like, I know there was a bunch of things you guys are trying to address. I mean, you had grown over the years through acquisition. You wanted to retain a certain amount of decentralization and independence of those acquisitions, but yet provide a more consistent customer experience to customers that might be ordering from different or ordering products from different divisions or groups within the organization. And I know just having better visibility was something too that you guys were working on as far as getting visibility into what exactly is happening in all these different parts of the business. Maybe just explain to us a little bit about what are the major buckets of stuff that are part of this overall journey.
Sure. And I'll start with our steel group, which is the largest part of the organization, where quite frankly, a lot of the change has occurred. We see change across the whole organization. But if you go back to just 2016, I'd have to add it up to be sure, but we had over 30 ERPs across the organization. And we are a company that has grown in cases by acquisition. And if you do an acquisition, you acquire ERPs. And if you have different ERPs, that means you have different technology, but you also have different business processes, different business practices. And if you have different business practices, they generate different types of data. And if you've got disparate data, it makes it harder to make decisions. So as I talked about some of those things that we were working towards, having business intelligence to make better decisions, and also having the people, process, and technology place to create the customer experiences that we want, that number of ERPs was really a representation of the disparity of business processes across the company. It represented not just decentralization of technology, but decentralization of process. So we really viewed the technology component hand in hand with putting business processes in place, business systems in place that would create better alignment of behavior to create a common set of data, and also to create a common set of behaviors to give our customers a more consistent experience. And that is one of the things we heard over and over from our customers, is we want a more consistent experience. We heard over and over from our customers, you guys have the best people. We love your people. We love working with Nucor folks. We've never heard people say you got the best systems. Our people did a great job overcoming the inconsistencies and the lack of sophistication of our systems. They did a great job overcoming that. But to be world-class in customer experience and to really be the partners that we want to be with many of our customers, that had to change. So there is a major ERP overhaul going across the entire steelmaking group. We've got 30 steel mills. We've got half of them integrated onto Oracle. Part of that is creating a more uniform platform of level 3 manufacturing systems across our shop floors. So that part of our business is roughly a $20 billion chunk of business that's getting an entire business system and manufacturing system overhaul. Sushma Walker, who I work real closely with, who might be watching right now, is leading that effort. And I think she would say that the biggest challenge to that is the alignment of the processes, not the technology. So that ERP platform creates better consistency in our business systems. We've had a major data transformation effort that we've been going through. And if you've got 30 ERPs just in the steel mills that you start with, that's 30 different sets of data. to work with. We didn't have time to wait for a unified ERP before we could start leveraging BI and digital solutions. So we built a data platform that actually allowed all of our ERPs to send information to Charlotte and create a commonized platform that actually allowed us to have a consistent BI platform. And then it also allowed us to have a much more consistent interface with our customers. So that's really probably the piece that I think really began to make sense in the company. If you're creating consistency with business systems and manufacturing systems, you're harnessing the data. Well, if you don't do anything with that, then you've just put in new systems. Well, we actually want to consume that information differently, create more transparency so that people can see that information and make better decisions, all the way through our vertical chains and how we take care of our customers. And we've been able to do a completely different set of things with our customers. We can do things now with that data platform to create a much more unified experience across the diversity of products we offer. So if you can't provide a more consistent experience and make it easier for people to consume your diversity of offering, then what's the value of the diversity? It's just as easy to get it in other places. So that whole chain of events from business system level 3 data platform to internal BI and the deliverables to the customers has really created an opportunity for us to have a very integrated platform of people, process, and technology. And as I say it, it sounds awesome, and we're very happy with how it's going. Doing all of those things at the same time is really challenging. It's really challenging.
Especially at a time where, we were talking right before we started filming this, that demand for steel right now is through the roof. So your operations now in parallel are taking off and blowing up and, testing your capacity and all that good stuff. And at the same time, you're trying to continue this journey. Has this project or this overall stream of the business and technology journey, has that been disrupted at all by the fact that your business is taking off again?
COVID made it challenging. We've had some minor delays, but overall things have kept moving. And when COVID occurred, many of our end markets basically stopped. The auto plants stopped, construction stopped, and our demand plummeted. And it's fascinating to watch what happens to a 2-month disruption in your end markets. The supply chains don't just magically start back up. So we're rushing to catch up with those lags in the supply chain, and we are exceptionally busy. And it does create challenges. I've said the term several times: people, process, and technology. And if our folks are running very hard just to keep up with the basic demands of the current state of the business, there's less time, there's less energy to allocate to the changes. Mm-hmm. And for the people on this call, and I know you know it as well as anyone, when you're changing your business systems, when you're putting in a new ERP, when you're changing how you interface with your customers, that's not light work. It's heavy work. And it can be frustrating at times. It's taxing on people as they learn new processes. And it is challenging. I was just sitting with our digital solutions team the other day and said, tell me what you guys are feeling right now. How does this look and feel across the company? And they talked about the fact that our sales teams, our inside sales teams, do such a great job of servicing our customers. They said they're so busy. It's hard to catch up with their pace of work right now. So we're making it work, and we're largely staying on target. But we got a lot of people working hard to do it, working a lot of hours. Yeah,
absolutely. So when you look at this project so far, this journey that you're on, which in some ways is I hate to call it a project, because it's almost like an ongoing, continuous journey that you guys have embarked on here. But when you think about this journey, what have some of the biggest challenges been so far that you've run into?
Yeah, well, I think you kind of hit on it earlier, Eric. For us in our culture, the idea that people are owners of their jobs. They take personal responsibility for their work and the output of their work. And I feel really lucky and blessed to work in this company. Our biggest challenge is oftentimes people are fighting for ownership. Don't take that from me. That's mine. I want to make that work. That's my team's responsibility. So when you're putting in these new systems and these new processes, there's many occasions where someone's level of ownership of that process is diminished. A single plant ERP that's been homegrown, that local IT team can pull all the levers and push all the buttons to make as many custom configurations, changes, systems changes that they want to make. They can customize it. The sales team, whether it's a level 3 system, an operator comes down and says, I want this tweak, I want this change, they can make it. Well, when you're putting a more unified ERP across a set of businesses to get those economies of scale and those synergies, it's not that simple. And I think that's the biggest challenge for us. How do we help? Or how do we move this forward in a way that optimizes ownership of a broader system, to where people feel as engaged as they always have in the organization, that they can show up and make a difference? And I think the way we've gone at that is continuous education and communication around the vision and what we're working to accomplish around it. And that's helpful. It's not a perfect silver bullet, because if you show up and you work a 10, 11, 12-hour day and you're working long hours because you're changing what you do and you may not have as much control over it, you might be bought into the vision. It's still frustrating. Mm-hmm. And, that we care about that, and we worry about that, and we talk about that. And that's a constant balance and challenge that we deal with every day, regardless of the part of that chain: ERP, level 3, data, BI, digital solutions for our customers. Every part of that chain, we feel that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm going to come to some other questions I have for you here in a second, but in the meantime, a couple of comments and questions that have come from the audience here on the different streams we have. Over on, starting here on Crowdcast, just a couple comments from Sam Graham. Thanks for joining again today, Sam. His comment is, great to hear the computer systems are about people and not technology. So I think it's, you're one of the few people that I haven't had to prompt or convince that is the case. You believe that. You might believe that even more than I do, just based on your background and your experience right now.
Oh, I think that's something that we've always believed, and we believe it more today with what we've gone through. And the thing that I see is if people want to make technology work, they'll figure out how to make it work. If they don't want to make it work, or they're not interested in it, it's not going to work very well. Yeah. So attaching that technology to an outcome that matters to the organization and the people doing it really seems to matter a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. So here's a question from Roy over on LinkedIn, and his comment is that his organization is about enabling digital transformation at scale, even for small and mid-sized companies. The challenge today is the cost of adoption. It's too difficult for most to cross the chasm. What percentage of your projects fail to succeed to scale across your enterprise? Mm-hmm. So are there, I guess, just thinking about scale, maybe that's an interesting thread, given that the comment we had earlier, the discussion we had earlier about how you're this big, massive company, but you don't act like one in some ways, and you try to act like, a decentralized company, for lack of a better word. Do you have trouble scaling some of these efforts and some of these projects, given that sort of, in some ways, that's a competing priority there? So how do you guys handle scale versus that decentralization?
Well, we do, and fortunately, I can say that on the ERP front, we've not experienced failures. When we've decided to put in an ERP and take it live, we've done that, and we've been able to do that without disrupting our business. So in that case, we've largely been able to do what we initially set out to do. Where I've seen us have some failures and have to learn from them is really on the data platform, how quickly we can harness data and how quickly we can use it. The BI side of it, to me, has been also very challenging. A need may pop up in the organization to say, well, we want this type of information to create this type of visibility. Okay, well, you don't snap your fingers and get that instantly. The question becomes, where do you stand that up? Do you stand that up across the enterprise so that it's uniform for everyone to see in a common way? And if you do that, that's likely going to slow you down. That's more data you got to put under control, and that's more data that you have to stand up in a BI platform. And whether it's BI or whether it's trying to harness, buckets of data for our customers, there are times where we have misjudged at what level of the organization we should be doing that at. I think initially our initial BI efforts were probably overly ambitious. We tried to scale too broad, too fast, and we were too slow. What we stood up was spectacular, and the organization loved it. But when you give somebody something they like, they want more of it. And we're learning from that now and recognizing that we can deploy things in smaller instances at different levels of the organization more quickly. And we don't have the full answer on that. That's another thing that we're debating on a daily basis. Where does that sit? Who should own that? How much consistency do we need? How fast does that need to iterate and change? And I was talking to someone the other day, and they said the challenge with BI and data is you're always a step behind. It doesn't seem like you can ever really meet the demands that you face. And I think in some regards that's true. Being as close to it as you can be matters. So that's where I think, and from a customer standpoint, we've got thousands of customers, and how do you sort through what's needed, what's wanted, where there's most value with your partners? We've missed in terms of really fully understanding in some cases where we can add the most value with our partnerships with our customers. And we've put a lot of work in some things that turned out to be okay. And after we did it, we were like, wow, I don't know that that's adding a whole lot of value. So, when you talk about scaling stuff, if you talk about scaling technology, all right, good. Scaling solutions, especially with your customers, to me is a better way to look at that. We've scaled some technology and processes that did not lead to a scaling of solutions. And, we've learned from that. You put all this work into something and you say, oh, that didn't get us what we wanted to. That changes how we approach things. Is that helpful?
Yeah, it helps me. And Roy, if you have follow-up questions on that question, let me know. But I think it's a great question and a great response, because it shows a couple things. One is how you balance sometimes competing priorities, and this is just one example that we're talking about here. But you also bring up a good point, which is that there is no one-size-fits-all answer, even within the same organization. We always say that to our clients, like, hey, what worked for Nucor isn't necessarily going to work for you over here. You've got to sort of tailor that. But even within Nucor, different work groups, different parts of the organization, different levels are going to have different needs. And, you handle that accordingly. One thing I've noticed about your team in general, I'd say, is that it's a very fascinating phenomena that I don't know if you observe it being part of it, but being outside looking in, I'm always fascinated by how fast you guys are able to, at least those of you at the executive and mid-management levels, are able to go from the strategic way of thinking and just go straight down into the details and then bounce back up to strategic thinking. And you guys do a good job, whereas most organizations are stuck, or a lot of people are stuck on one or the other. They're either too high level or they're too far in the weeds and they don't know how to pivot or adjust. And you guys seem to know how to when you need to micromanage and when you need to roll up your sleeves and when you need to back up and look at the strategic aspects of a project, which I find fascinating.
Well, I think some of that, Eric, is inherent in our structure. So, as we talked about the history of the company and I talked about the business, our structure is very, very different. I think I'd have to look. I think we're like 120 on the Fortune 500. That might have moved up or down. I don't remember. But here in Charlotte at our corporate office, we have about 140 people, and there's 27,000 of us around the company. So it's a really, really small corporate office.
Yeah, that's really.
It is. And we really only have 4 levels of management in the company. You got supervisors, managers, VP GMs, and EVPs. We only have 7 of those and a CEO. It's a very, very lean organization. And it's interesting. Our first CEO or CFO used to hand out this book. It's called Parkinson's Law. You can't even get it digitally. And by the shape of this book, you can tell. And it basically talks about, in some regards, how lean structure forces you to focus on the right things, but it also keeps the organization from sprawling in ways that keep people from being connected from strategy to execution. And I see that there's pros and cons to that. I think there's times where senior level leaders do spend more time in tactics than what might be optimal. Of course, there's benefit in that, in staying connected and understanding how strategy moves to execution. I don't know that we got it balanced perfectly, but I do think our senior leaders stay more closely attached to execution than what you would see in other organizations. Yeah. I get pulled into, if I'm chatting with heads of IT in other companies, the level of granularity that I get pulled into is very different than what they get pulled into.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the benefits of that approach and that mindset and that structure that you have as it relates to some of the ERP projects you're going through and BI and this overall transformation is that you guys have this degree of ownership, which you were talking about a minute ago as well. You have a degree of ownership that is extremely rare, and you tend to, everyone says the old Ronald Reagan term, trust but verify. Mm-hmm. You guys have it's like trust but verify on steroids. Like you know when to verify and you know when to trust, and you just have this sixth sense almost as an organization. And one example that comes to mind is, I know working with Sushma on the ERP project, you guys have a pretty healthy support from outside consultants, but you guys have been very active in sort of rationalizing the use of outside consultants. And you don't just take advice from outsiders or from anyone for that matter blindly. You have to see it, you have to believe it, you have to feel it, experience it, all that stuff. And so I think it's a combination of that ownership, the flat structure, your culture. And I think that all translates into some good lessons for people going through transformations where you have to know, first of all, you have to recognize that it's your project, it's your transformation. It's not the consultants, it's not the technology providers, it's not anyone's but yours. And you guys are really good at that. And so I don't know if you have any advice for people, how do you short of overhauling your culture and becoming more like Nucor, which would take decades, and it took you guys decades to get to where you are. What sort of tidbits of advice could you give to an organization where maybe that's not an inherent part of their culture or organization, but maybe they could apply some lessons to their transformations?
Yeah. So I think, one of the things that is very true in Nucor is that, folks are expected to be owners of their jobs, and we hire folks that I think in general are very personally responsible people. And if you ask someone to be responsible for something, you have to give them the freedom and the leeway and the bandwidth to take ownership. And I've worked in other organizations and seen companies that want to hold people accountable, and that person doesn't really have all of the levers and freedom to be fully responsible for the outcome. So, I see a question on the screen that Karen wrote. How do you help people deal with the loss of what they've been doing that gives them a sense of their contributions? That's an awesome question. I hope we're doing, we really work at this. We are a results-driven organization. Results matter. And we're making these changes to get better results. And if we help people see that those changes are leading to better results, that matters. A part of that is how we get paid. Every human in this company gets paid for performance. Everyone is on an incentive system, and it's not an individual incentive system, it's based on the team. So you rise and fall with your team. We've talked for years about sharing the gain and sharing the pain. And, if your boss allows you to have the responsibility, if the organizational structure allows you to have the responsibility, and you yourself and your team can benefit from being successful with that responsibility, if you hire the right people, they will take ownership and they'll fight for the ownership. So, I think the folks in the company today, we're fortunate benefactors of how the company was set up. We inherited it from Ken Iverson and the people who built the company, and they did build the organizational structure around disruptive innovation, and that structure was just as innovative as the technology that made the steel, and we're lucky to have received that. And we're just doing our best not to mess it up and keep it going, I think.
All right. Yeah, hopefully make it even better and just keep building on what they've done.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
And one example that I hope you don't mind me sharing is just building on the story with Sushma and you on the transformation and the outside consultants. I remember there was a point not too long ago in the project where the run rate, the monthly run rate had reached a certain level and the project was extending, and you guys sort of called an audible or a timeout and said, hey, hold on, let's rethink this plan. And you guys took that on yourself and said, here's how we're going to use the consultants. Here's how we're going to recast the plan. And that, quite frankly, not many organizations we work with have the guts for, I guess I'll use the word guts as it was. Not many people have the guts to take that bold of a stance and back to the ownership and, just the ownership of it. I found that very fascinating as well.
Yeah, and I think that fits into some of what I just shared. It's about the results. If you're putting in business systems and level 3s across your facilities, you're impacting their operations. Not only does that need to get done well, you're spending money as you do it. Putting in ERPs in and of themselves don't generate profits. We're consuming the profits of the company as we do it. And the people doing that get paid based on the profitability of the businesses they're serving. They want to see those businesses run. So I think there's just a natural pull in the company towards results. When you're paid on the results, that scorecard shows up. If you're paid every 2 weeks or every month, there's a scorecard in your paycheck, and that matters.
Yeah.
The other thing about the pay is if you have your hands in each other's pockets, if what I do impacts how you get paid, you're more inclined to work more closely with that person. Feedback becomes more transparent. Your willingness to help that person be successful, I think matters. I think it pulls people together, people are, folks we hire are competitive. They want to be successful, and they're willing to help each other be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. We're getting some questions over here on LinkedIn, so maybe I'll pick a couple of them here. How about this? This is a good one. How can we keep up with project timelines if stakeholders are not responding on time? And this is by Shandan. I hope I pronounced that right, over on LinkedIn. So how can we keep up with project timelines if stakeholders aren't responding on time? Do you ever have that issue there at Nucor?
We have a very organized project management system. We actually brought in some partners to help us with that. And we do use in all of our IT and digital change efforts, we do use a third-party project manager. And the reason why we use a third party is, if the person running the project owns some portion of it, it's a bit like the fox guard in the hen house. We actually were intentional in that we wanted a nonpartisan, unbiased person who did not have a stake in some part of the deliverable to help us see the project. And we've got some great partners that help us do that. Whether it's ERP, level 3, data, digital, we have the same format and framework for managing projects. They do sit in big portfolios, and we have a natural rhythm for how we examine the project. And whether it's the first week of the project or the 50th week, every week we have a stand-up call that takes no more than 30 minutes where all of the stakeholders get visibility into everything that's gone on in that project. And if there's a delay in one place, everybody sees it. And if you're delayed, you account for it. And this is not a shaming exercise. This is not a blaming exercise. It's a group accountability thing to figure out what's working, what's not, and to create visibility across the team. So, I don't see instances in Nucor where people are just not doing their jobs. I see instances where components of projects delay, oftentimes for really good reasons. Sometimes it's confusion, sometimes it's misalignment. But if you look at it on a weekly basis, you can ask the questions and help the team figure it out. So I'm not sure that's a great answer. I would say that the way we deal with that is really through transparency and frequency. We're frequently digging into the depths of every project, and it's expected everyone participates in that. And we really do have a good spirit around it. It's not coming together to point fingers. It's about the team operating together. Yeah.
It's a great point. And I think it's probably a little bit hard for you to answer because you've set up the organization is set up to mitigate that risk that the author of that question is asking there. Mm-hmm. So here's a question from Sam Graham over on Crowdcast here. He said that given that Nucor doesn't like consultants, why did they choose to work with Third Stage? It's a loaded question, but maybe just to broaden a little bit, make it a little less commercial or less of a sales pitch for Third Stage. How do you guys, just in general, because you are, I think you would agree with this, you're fairly picky about the types of partners you work with and people outside of Nucor that are going to advise you. How do you balance that? How do you recognize the need for outside help? How do you find the right fit for a culture that's that strong that really doesn't like consultants? How do you balance that?
I think to say we don't like consultants might be a little strong.
That's a generalization, of course.
We are really picky, and we're really picky because we have a very strong culture. Our organizational structure and the way our business runs is, we think, fairly different from other companies. So one of the things that is just immediately off-putting to us is when somebody says, I've worked with many companies like yours, and their pitch is, I understand your problem, I can solve it. And whether you're a consultant approaching us or whether you're a Nucor person approaching another Nucor person, we would much prefer someone ask questions and understand the situation, even if they understand it. If you don't ask questions, you're not sending the right message to the person you're dealing with. So I see a lot of consultants who don't approach the clients in a learning fashion. And then the other thing that's challenging to us is frequently consultants are selling something beyond guidance and knowledge. There's something else that they're selling, and I think, Eric, that's why our organizations have gotten along so well for so long. You guys have done a great job of listening, learning, getting to know our people and how we operate, and then we're always confident you're not trying to sell us something. You're trying to help us make better decisions, and I think you've always recognized we accept the ownership of the decisions. We want you to push on us, debate with us, hold the mirror up to us. And you've been willing to give us tough feedback when we've needed it. And we want that. But we want to own the decision.
Yeah. And I think that's the key right there. As long as you guys are owning it, obviously you're looking for cultural fit, types of partners, whether it's us or anyone else that fits, your culture and that aligns with that. I think that's important. Right. A lot of people don't think about that because it's intangible. It's hard. You have to kind of feel it. It's not a science by any means.
Right. And concepts are good. You pay consultants for concepts, but you want folks who can partner with you and help you do things too, and think through execution, and that matters.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're up at the top of the hour. So I might just ask you one more question here from the audience, if you don't mind, off of LinkedIn. I'll pick one off here. There's a couple comments here. Well said. Ownership is key to any project success. Balancing ownership with outsourcing is difficult at best. Let's see. Okay, here's one, and again, this might be a little bit difficult for you to ask because it's so baked into your organization and the DNA of Nucor. But what is the best way to motivate stakeholders or subject matter experts to take ownership during the course of an ERP implementation? And maybe from your perspective, you could think about it from the context of you've still got a business to run. Mm-hmm. Your business is busting at the seams at the moment, and has obviously it ebbs and flows as time goes on, and as you're doing this transformation in parallel. So how do you keep people focused on both things?
Yeah, I would love for someone else to answer that question and give us an answer, because it's hard. It is really hard, and I'll be a broken record on this. It really comes back to the ownership piece. I do think we are more willing to have lengthier, deeper conversations to get to ownership. I think we are willing to be questioned a lot. We're willing to be challenged a lot at all levels of the organization. And I think if people feel comfortable that they can challenge and push, they're willing to listen in return. And I think having that dialogue open where people feel like they can be heard, even if it doesn't land how they want, then they're more willing to follow. The other thing that I think we've got going for us today is we do have successes, and people do have more confidence in how things are going, and we're able to, not just on process implementation, but results in the marketplace. So we can actually do this stuff. We can actually get results, and that is helpful. But for us, it is what do we do for folks to assume the ownership and to grab it. And some days we're good with that, and some days we struggle with it.
Yeah. It's not an easy answer by any means, or an easy trade-off for sure.
No.
So maybe just to wrap up, for the audience here today, what if you had to summarize, think back to your days back in 2016, back when you're so much younger and more naive, 5 years ago, and what are the things you wish you knew then that you know now? Or if you want to think of it this way, what sort of advice might you give to someone who's about to start in a similar type of journey? What are some of the key takeaways you
the things, everyone's path is so different. I knew our company so well when I took the job, that position in digital. I had relationships across the organization. I worked in all of the businesses. I understood a lot about the organization. So that piece of it was comfortable for me. I would have liked to have understood the technology better out of the gate, because one thing I've learned is if you have put your blood, sweat, and tears into the technology, it's difficult to change, and we can all appreciate that. Mm-hmm. And if you don't know anything about the technology, it takes longer to understand what might need to change, what might not need to change. It's difficult to understand the ecosystem of people, process, and technology. And technology was my weakness, to understand that ecosystem. And there were times I probably didn't challenge hard enough because I didn't know better. There's times I probably accepted answers when I could have asked more questions, and I didn't even know what to ask. I would have had no idea what to have even asked. So I think where I would take that is I would be more intentional to find the weakness that you have and find partners that can really help you on that weakness. And I don't know that I did that as well as I could, to find people that could really help me. You and your organization did that in some regards along our journey. Took me a while to get there. So, if you're strong in technology and you don't know the organization as well, find the people that can help you navigate that quicker. But I would tell you, be intentional to understand your weakness in terms of people, process, and technology, and attack it with relationships and a network that can help you address that weakness.
Yeah, it's great advice. And just recognizing the breadth of skills and capabilities that are going to be required to make the project successful, and then recognizing where your weaknesses are and trying to find people that can fill in some of those gaps. I think that's a good way to look at it, and try and understand what you don't know. I mean, I know, that sounds like the hard part, and it makes sense. It's the hard part for a lot of us to know enough to ask the right questions. If you don't have a baseline level, that can be difficult. So just educating yourself and taking the initiative to learn as much as you can about this stuff before you start, it can be very helpful as well.
I remember sitting in many meetings and saying, I don't even know what question to ask right now. Can someone give me an idea of what I should ask? And that actually worked okay. But that's an uncomfortable feeling.
Right, at the time, especially, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, thank you so much for being here, Dan. Really appreciate it. I always, like I said, I always pick up little nuggets of new stuff. Even when I ask the same questions, I always pick up new stuff from you. So I really appreciate having you on the show. I appreciate having you as a client. I love learning from people like you and like your team in Nucor, and just appreciate all the lessons you've shared here today.
I appreciate you having me. It was a pleasure.
All right. Thanks very much for being here today, Dan. Great conversation. Really appreciate you being here. And it's actually stimulated a number of follow-on questions and discussion points that Paresa and I will get to here in just a second. But before then, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more on Transformation Ground Control.
And there she goes again, with a suitcase on.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm here with Paresa Noble, and had a really interesting conversation right before the break with Dan Krug, who is as I mentioned before, is one of my favorite people to talk to, and honestly one of my favorite clients that I've ever worked with in my career, just in terms of his personality and the way he operates. And I really like that organization. That company is a very cool company and very, very different, in a good way. So what were some of your observations, though? Not having been as close to Nucor over the years like I have, you might have a different opinion or a unique perspective on some of the things he talked about.
Yeah, I think you said it. Very different in a good way. I mean, I just love how he was so strong in his stance and his experience in the transformation that it was almost like you guys were a team in talking about it, So I definitely can respect that. And another thing that stood out to me is that they're so selective about their vocabulary. How cool is that in building their culture and what words we use in this process and what we don't. Like change management is a no. Transformation, don't say it.
Right.
We don't use the term consultants. I think that was powerful, and that is a good example for just how strong and powerful our words can be. It carries a lot of weight. So I liked that. But besides that, I love that he kind of gave the history of Nucor and how they started off as just, they created a commodity, steel. And as they went on, they realized there's a need for them to become a supply chain partner. And that's kind of how this transformation, hopefully I can use that word in the podcast,
Right.
came about, is they needed to, consolidate all of their different ERP systems from, it sounded like they had acquired a handful of other smaller companies, and that's why they had 30 different ERP systems. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They've acquired a lot of different companies.
Yeah. So, I mean, he said it best. It's different business processes, different data, and it makes it hard to make decisions. So they're going through this major overhaul, and he said it was a $20 billion chunk of the business that's getting a full system overhaul. So, I mean, what came to my mind is, when you have a tablecloth on a fully set table and you have to rip it out without making all the glasses fall over.
I've never done it successfully, but
me either. I think I would definitely break a lot of dishware, but this is what I'm thinking. I mean, they have so many, processes that are reliant on these different ERP systems, and to do a complete overhaul of a $20 billion chunk of the business seems like you're kind of trying to take that tablecloth from underneath the dishware without, disrupting it at all. So I guess, how do you do that without halting processes and procedures? How do you kind of, help with that overlap and make sure that things are still, taken away without any interruption when you're putting in this new system?
That's a tough challenge. I mean, for every organization, especially, smaller and mid-sized organizations where they are super lean and just don't have a lot of people on the bench waiting for a big, massive project like this to start. And, as we talked about in that interview, Nucor is a really lean organization. For as big as they are, I forgot what the exact number he said. It was the corporate staff, but it was a really small number of people that work at the headquarters. And so they're pretty lean, and most organizations are fairly lean. So you don't have a lot of capacity to just throw in a big project like this. So you end up, making some choices. You could either slow down, which is usually what most organizations do. You could rely more on consultants, which isn't necessarily a good answer, which may sound ironic coming from a consultant, but it just isn't a good idea to depend too much on consultants. You want that balance, right? You want that outside expertise, but you have to own it and, take possession of this project and, get people's involvement and all that good stuff. And that just takes time. So, knowing that the most common answer is to slow down the project. And when I say slow down, that's probably a misleading term. You're not really slowing down. You're just going at a pace that was the realistic pace to begin with. The problem is in these sorts of projects, you get software vendors and sales reps who are overly, zealous about how fast they think you can deploy their technology, which doesn't consider the fact that, you have these capacity bottlenecks like you're suggesting here. So I say slow down, but really it's getting a realistic view of what the timeline is going to be to begin with. If you do that right, then you're not slowing down. You're just going at the pace that makes sense for you. So that's probably the best way. I mean, you have to think of it as more of a slow burn or slower burn than you might want. And that's hard for a lot of companies to swallow because, a lot of them have some sort of burning platform for change. They've grown so much, and the system they're on is about to break, and or they have a old legacy system that's being sunset and is no longer going to be supported. So they have a certain amount of time that they have to get off that old system and get onto a new one. So there are cases where you're under these time pressures that can make it very difficult. But if you don't have those time pressures, to the extent you can, you want to make sure you have the right tempo, the right pace, and that you're doing those the right way. So I'd say that's probably the best way, is just to make sure you can get the right pace. And then, of course, if you can backfill resources and bring on additional resources to fill in the day-to-day jobs to replace the time that people are now going to devote to this project, that helps as well.
Right. That makes sense. I mean, if you take your time, you're often going to do it right the first time rather than have to backtrack and make up for issues along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And another thing that you mentioned was bring in more consultants. So let's talk about this, because it sounds like Nucor has a very interesting perspective on consultants. Who do they work with? They have high standards. They're, not just working with anybody. He used the term competitive. Everyone they work with is very competitive. So, that's a plus. He brought something up that I had not heard of before. And that's, again, I'm on the marketing side for our listeners, right? This is my first time hearing of bringing in a third-party project manager. So how common is this? Is this something that you see a lot of organizations do in a transformation?
A fair amount, but not the way they have. They brought in, I think a lot of times people conflate project manager with the technical or system integrator project lead, and those are two different roles. If a system integrator is selling you their services, they're going to say, hey, we've got a project manager, you don't need one. Or if you have one internally, they're going to work side by side with our project manager. But system integrators and vendors don't really provide a project management function. They provide I would consider it a work stream lead function. So yes, they're managing all the moving parts of one piece of the entire project. So it's not really, I'd say it's more of a project lead. And then you need sort of a program manager over the whole thing. And that's what he's talking about, is the program management over the whole thing. Now, the thing that he didn't really get into that's super interesting about that piece of it, the third-party project management function, is that it's still the Nucor people that are providing the thought leadership and the strategy and the direction. It's just that they use project managers to help figure out how to execute and help track the execution of that. That makes sense. So it's not, a lot of times people think, well, I'm going to hire a project manager. They're going to come in and just tell me how I should run this and give me a plan, and I'll bless it and they'll go run with it. This is different. This is much more collaborative, where they're setting the vision, they're setting the tempo. They're saying, hey, it's a 7-year project, and here's how we're going to phase it, and here's how it's going to look. Now help us put together that plan that reflects that and track it and make sure we're on track and identifying the risks and all that good stuff. So I'd say yes, but the way they use their outside project management and consultants in general is a lot different than most organizations I've seen.
Interesting. And the first thing that came to my mind was an in-house project manager might be helpful in the sense that they know everybody that's on the project, internal to the company. They'll know the resources a bit better than maybe a third party would, but it sounds like the collaborative element is the key to the puzzle. Is if you're working collaboratively hand in hand, it can help streamline, is what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Would you say there's pros and cons to bringing on a third party versus keeping an in-house project manager? And what would those be?
Yeah. So, first of all, I don't think it's necessarily an either or decision. It's just a lot of times it's sort of like a scale, where's the balance going to be in our use of outside project management versus internal. I think you need both. You have to have, in my opinion, someone in-house that is sort of the face of the project, the lead, the internal lead, because ultimately you need someone that can identify what internal resources might be needed, or if something's getting stuck internally, as far as making progress or getting deliverables. An outside consultant or project manager is not going to help effectively with that. You need someone internally that can own that and hold people accountable and all that stuff. The outside consultants are there to provide the methodologies and the guidance and the advice that you can then go execute. And, it's more of a collaborative approach. So I think, I'd say the trade-off of the pros and cons are getting too far to one extreme or the other. If you get too far down the extreme of using consultants and sort of outsourcing the whole thing, then you lost that ownership. You don't have as much understanding of the project and the nuances of it, and you therefore become more dependent on those consultants. So it's harder to get rid of them, to be honest. And you want to get rid of the consultants. Again, coming from a consultant, it may sound odd saying, but you don't want your consultants there forever. You want them to come in, do the project, and get out. That's the whole point of having that variable cost in that structure. And then on the flip side, if you depend too much on your internal staff and not enough on outside help, chances are you're just going to go back to the way you've always done things, and you're sort of operating in an echo chamber of the way things have always been, and it's a lot harder to change. So, and not to mention that most internal people, even if you've been through a project or two in the past like this, chances are you don't have the level of depth of expertise that an outside expert team might have. So it's more a matter of just finding that right balance for you, but it should be balanced somewhere in the middle where you're getting the best of both worlds.
Okay, that makes sense. So and then that takes me to my next question. They are, like we said, they're very selective in the consultants and probably the project managers that they bring in, anybody third party to them. So for other companies that are wanting to kind of raise those standards and follow suit to make sure that they're only working with the best of the best, what are the characteristics that companies and organizations should be looking for when they start pursuing an external consultant?
Yeah, maybe I'll answer that through the lens of how I understand Nucor to vet out consultants. And I think, by the way, and I don't just say this because they're a client of ours and they chose us as one of the lucky few that gets to be a consultant for them, but I think they are highly effective at vetting out and using consultants selectively. Even with us, I mean, most clients that we work with would use us, I'd say more, maybe depend on us more, whereas they're the opposite. And they say, we've got a very specific need. It's right here in this box, and that's where we want you to help. And, a lot of consultants have a tendency to kind of broaden the scope or broaden their reach within an organization, and I don't know if it's conscious or not, but it just doesn't happen there. They have a very specific need, and they want you to fit in that role. So I think so where I was going with that, though, is just really being deliberate about how you use consultants. I think too often people don't know enough about these sorts of projects, and they just defer to whatever the system integrator or the consultants tell them. So if I were to come to you and say, okay, Paresa, you're going to need 50 of my people full time on this project, you may not know enough to ask the question of, well, why 50? Why not 30 or 10? Or why so many? Why do we have to spend that much? And I could blow smoke and mirrors and say, well, it's because of the complexity of the technology, and you wouldn't understand, and we need a full-time person to do this, another one to do that, and you don't know enough to challenge it. But they're the types, though, they roll up their sleeves and they get into the details and they do challenge it. They'll say, wait, are we sure this doesn't make sense to us? This doesn't fit. So I think that's part of it. The other part of it is just getting past all the fluff that consultants tend to have. I think that's a dark side of consulting is there's just a lot of fluff, a lot of really pretty PowerPoint presentations that take hours and hours and weeks and months to create. And I came from the big consulting firm environment where I was part of that machine where I don't know how many hours I spent just perfecting and fine tuning these slides that we were going to give to an executive presentation. And you just at the end of the day wonder, is that really adding value? I mean, yes, you need to be a good communicator. You need to have a good message. You need to have a good deliverable that can be circulated throughout the organization. But there's that point of diminishing returns. And I think that's what you have to find as an organization is, where's my point of diminishing returns with the consultants? Because if you let consultants in general go past that, they're going to keep going, and they're going to keep spending more and more time doing the simplest of tasks and, going down rabbit holes you don't need them going down. So you really have to manage those consultants and make sure you don't get too far past that point of diminishing returns. And so that's what I think they're very good at. I don't know if they would articulate it that way or if they'd agree with me, but that's my observation is they seem to know intuitively how to do that. And I don't think he mentioned this in the interview, but he's told, I just know from working with him in the past that they also, with their system integrator, they've a couple times now sort of recast the way that has been staffed. And I've never seen a client do that where as aggressively as Nucor does. They'll say, hey, we're running at a run rate of X amount of money per month on this project, and we've got X number of consultants. We need to cut that back, and here's how we're going to cut it back. And they just take more of an active role in it. And I think a lot of companies are afraid to do that. They're afraid to challenge, an Accenture or Deloitte, who are the experts, and there's 100 of them on your project. If you're a big company, you just are outnumbered. If you're one person, one guy or gal, and you've got 100 consultants that are all on the same page telling you need all 100 of us here, it can be intimidating to go say, no, we're going to cut that in half, actually, or whatever the number is. And Nucor is not afraid to do that. And I commend them for that. I think every organization should do that. And when I say every, I literally mean every organization should be willing to, stick their neck out and say, this is our organization, our project, and this is how we're going to run it. And you certainly take advice from outsiders, but you at the end of the day have to make the decision that's right for your organization. So that's I don't know if I answered your question directly. It was a very long-winded answer, but hopefully that got
Yeah. No, that was a perfect answer. I think that's such valuable insights on just how to manage your external consultants and make sure you're maximizing their value. And Dan even said that with I think it was how he felt at the beginning was, I didn't know what questions to ask in the meetings. It sounds like he came to it, I don't want to say green, but with room to learn about it. And even so, they've gotten to a point where they are okay challenging these big players like you just mentioned. So, I guess that's a big note to our listeners is do not be afraid. You may not be fully cognizant, I guess, of all the ins and outs of a digital transformation, but you will be by the end of your transformation. So stay in it, stay present, stay, hold everybody accountable that's internal to your team. That was one other thing that stood out to me is their weekly stand-ups for where exactly the project is in the grand scheme of things. And it helps them create kind of that group accountability and make sure everything's staying on track. Because a 7-year project, it's easy to get lost in it, I would imagine, especially for such a big company. So to have those weekly meetings, do they bring the consultants into those stand-up meetings?
I believe they do, yeah.
Okay, got
Personally
it.
not in, but yeah, I believe the teams are. Yeah. I know when we have different projects with them at different points, because they're not, it's not like we're involved with one big work stream. Usually it's at different points throughout the project. But when we are, there's and we do this with our clients too. It's just a weekly stand up to make sure we're all in sync. So that's a good best practice in general.
Right. Just really, if you think about any department, anything, having a weekly stand up with your team to make sure everybody's where they need to be, answer questions, just get in sync. It's important. So that makes sense. So another thing too, that he talked a lot about was business intelligence. So, funneling in all of the data into one kind of common source so that they could make better decisions and provide that world-class customer experience. I'm curious, can you talk to me a little bit about business intelligence and how it differs from artificial intelligence? Is there overlap? What's the difference? Tell me about that.
Sure. So they both involve heavy amounts of data. So that's how they're similar, both artificial intelligence and business intelligence. One is more, business intelligence is a little more leaning towards traditional reporting and analytics. So, just being able to make sense of all the pieces of data. So it's basically business intelligence is focused on presenting to humans data in a way that is useful to them. So, for example, if I want to know the profitability of, a certain customer segment within a customer or a certain market within a certain market in the world, I should be able to slice and dice that data in a way that makes sense to me. And so business intelligence is a tool that allows you to do that. It's a lot like reporting, but it's more than that. It's reporting on steroids. I'd say it's more getting deep into the analytics of the organization. Artificial intelligence, though, is different in that it's going a step further, where now you're not only taking data and you're not just spitting out information to humans that then use that information to make some sort of decision. It's actually making a decision or making a recommendation for you based on that. So, as an example, artificial intelligence could be used for a common usage in the world of enterprise technology right now is with purchase order approvals and accounts payable. So you get an invoice, and if you're an organization that's processing hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of invoices a month, artificial intelligence can look at that data, look for the patterns, and identify where the outliers are, where the potential points of fraud or outlying payables might be, and it can automatically approve and process everything else, and it just flags the things that it thinks are not right based on history or other parameters. So it's more of it's taking some sort of action or actually acting on the data, whereas business intelligence is more presenting the data in a way that humans can make sense of and make their own decisions.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Because it seemed like they would be fairly similar, but that's a distinct difference for sure. And I'm excited for the conversation with Stuart too, because he's going to dive deeper into artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies like robotics, RPA, and even blockchain. So I want to get to that in a second, but before we dive in, I mean, let's kind of expand on artificial intelligence too, because I think the whole concept is just fascinating. You know, we're at the brink of it. We're not fully in it, I don't think. Hopefully not. And it's causing a lot of excitement, but a lot of fear from what it sounds like. You know, even when I'm just talking to friends or family, it's, you know, are robots going to take over the world, or is this something that's actually going to help progress us forward? Which, I don't know. What do you think? I'd be the latter. What do you think?
I think bigger picture, it'll probably propel us forward. I mean, I think the problem isn't so much of the potential of what'll happen in the long term. I think it's more of a short term fear, because, you know, if I'm doing a job that could be easily automated with robotics or artificial intelligence, I'm not, and especially if I'm living paycheck to paycheck and I'm not a wealthy person, I'm not going to necessarily think, oh, that's okay if they replace my job or automate my job, because in the long run, it's going to be a net benefit and it's going to create more opportunity, and I'll just repurpose my skills and I'll go do something else. That may actually be what ends up happening in the long term, but right now you need to pay your bills and you are absolutely concerned that your job is being threatened. So I think that's a really important thing or reality to keep in mind, is that I think, you know, for a lot of us that are, you know, higher up in an organization and further along in our careers or whatever, we're sort of at that self-actualization point of our careers where we're not necessarily working to just pay bills or live paycheck to paycheck, but most of the world is. I mean, that's where most of the world is within any organization. So you have to just recognize that just because you see the bigger picture, and even if you assume that everyone in your organization can see that bigger picture, the reality is there's a threat in the short term. And that's why change management is becoming even more important than it's ever been, because technology is becoming more of a short-term threat on one hand, but more of a long-term opportunity on the other hand. So I think it's both, and that's the hard part, and that's the confusing part of it, is how could it possibly be that we would resist a technology that has so much potential to make things better? Well, the reason is because you are threatening my job right now, and I may not pay my bills right now because that technology might disrupt that.
Right. And this is taking me back to your conversation with Dan too, because you're talking about a system overhaul, right? That is going to probably replace those lower value jobs more quickly than the other jobs that are out there. So it's kind of like, how are you going to, you know, motivate your employees who might be, you know, facing a loss of their job or even a complete pivot in their job? Because if you think about it, I mean, everybody, and Dan said it best, is everybody takes ownership of what they do, no matter if they're, you know, pushing a button on the, you know, supply chain assembly line, or if they're, you know, pitching a huge deck to their executive board. You're taking ownership in the work that you do because it is what you think is going to get you ahead and help you grow within the company or within the organization you're at. So if a new technology is coming in to kind of steal your thunder, if you will, and take that ownership away from you, you know, what can you do as an employee? You know, if you're faced with this challenge where, you know, maybe your team or you yourself in your role are no longer going to have ownership of the tasks that you have been working on for so long, how can you kind of turn those lemons into lemonade? What would you say to an employee that's up against, you know, that challenge, whether it's with a basic ERP system or something as extensive as artificial intelligence?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing I'd say is I don't know the bad news. I don't think there's a whole lot that most employees can do about it, and that's the bad news. Now, the good news is that the people that can do something about it are the executive leadership, the project team, the people that are sort of driving the change and leading the change. I know everyone wants to talk about the ground up, bottom up sort of approach to change and the grassroots approach. That's great, and you eventually want to get there, but a lot of times it has to come from the top, and the top of the organization, and the project transformation needs to help define early on how is this going to look for Phil in accounting. I know we recently published a blog that was about how robots are coming for Phil in accounting, and it was about this exact topic. So if you go to our website and just search up Phil in accounting, you'll find that blog. It's pretty interesting, but if Phil in accounting, his job is going to get automated, and let's just say 60% of his job could be automated with this new technology, and we're going to roll it out here in 2 years. We have 2 years to figure out what are we going to do with Phil, and how do we either repurpose him for another job, or how do we redefine his role in a way and train him and develop him in a way that he can handle this new role, so that by the time the technology comes and replaces that part of his old job, he's already sort of transitioning into his new job. I think what most organizations do, though, which is a huge problem, is they don't really worry too much about it. They assume Phil's on board because it's going to make us more profitable and it's going to make his job easier because it's automating it. Well, no, Phil takes pride in the fact that he's doing all this manual work, and the fact that the company or the organization depends on him to do this stuff manually, and he takes pride in that. So we have to recognize that and say, okay, well, Phil's not just going to embrace this. He may say he is, and on the surface he may want to, but the reality is there's going to be an underlying fear that's going to overcome him at some point along the way. So we have to figure out how to transition as early as possible from a change perspective, and most organizations wait way too long after the resistance to change is already well embedded within the organization. And then what ends up happening is you roll out this technology, you spend all this time and money rolling it out, and Phil ends up going back to the way he's always done things because he finds a reason to do that. And so everyone loses in that situation.
Right. It's very important. I mean, OCM is a pillar to any type of digital project, and that's something we always talk about. Another thing, just to switch quickly to something else that I think is super interesting that I know Stuart's going to talk about, is blockchain and this, fascinating world of cryptocurrencies all based on blockchain and this whole blockchain technology. So I don't know, talking about the crypto world, it's becoming more and more popular by the day, by the minute. So I'm curious, would you invest in the crypto world? What are your thoughts on cryptocurrencies?
Honestly and ironically, even though I'm an entrepreneur and have started a company and run a company, I'm extremely risk adverse. So no, I have no desire to invest in cryptocurrency. I also don't like to go to Vegas and gamble. I don't like, even if it's just $5 on a hand of blackjack, I just hate losing money. So
yep.
I'd rather go with a surer bet. Now, I know a lot of people have made money on cryptocurrency, and there's probably tons of ways to make money there. I don't know a lot about it. That's the other thing. Compared to others in the tech world, I probably know a lot less about cryptocurrency. I know a lot about blockchain and its application in enterprise technologies, but as far as the connection with cryptocurrency and its real world application, I'm still not 100% clear on that. So nowhere near close to wanting to invest. I'm no Elon Musk, in terms of wanting to invest a ton of money in it.
Yeah, I don't think you're alone. I mean, it's definitely a very complex, just a completely different world when it comes to investing. And I'd say for anybody that's thinking about investing in crypto, just look at it exactly as Eric just said it. It is a gamble. Pretend like you're going to Vegas. Mm-hmm. It's very hit or miss. But with that, I still see companies that are starting to accept Bitcoin as payment. It's hit or miss there too. If some companies are, some companies aren't. But I mean, just taking what your perspective is and knowing that a lot of people feel the same way, and also looking at the other side of the coin, that, no pun intended, that there are people who are very into trading crypto. Would you advise businesses to start accepting Bitcoin as a form of payment going forward? I know Stu is going to talk about it, but I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Honestly, if I were in that position, I would probably wait and see how things shake out with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency to see if it's a real thing. But there's part of me that thinks that this is like, 20 years from now, our kids are going to be talking about cryptocurrency like it's some weird, bizarre foreign concept, or we'll be talking about it nostalgically like we used to talk about, Rubik's Cube, or I did. You probably didn't, but I talked nostalgically about Pac-Man or Rubik's Cube, but it seems so outdated now, and almost like a flash in the pan. So I don't know. I'd wait and see if it's a real legitimate long-term benefit. I think blockchain itself, I think that's legitimate. The underlying technology behind cryptocurrency, I think that's absolutely legitimate. But cryptocurrency itself, I'm not sold on that yet. But I'm a skeptic by nature, so take it with a grain of salt.
Right. I love it. Well, I'm excited to hear what Stuart's thoughts are. I know he's going to be talking about, all the different emerging technologies that are coming down the pipeline. And I'm curious to see where we land 5, 10, 20 years from now as it relates to these.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm excited for this. And he's got a good perspective on this. So we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back in our last segment here, talk with Stuart Robb from Third Stage Europe, and we'll talk about emerging technologies, including blockchain, AI, robots, and a bunch of other stuff. So we'll take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
Hey, Mama, it's me.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. My name is Eric Kimberling. Excited to have our next guest on the show, who's been on here a few times now. Stuart Robb is our Vice President of Third Stage Europe. He's here to talk about emerging technologies. So rather than just talking about ERP and CRM and human capital management and all the sort of the usual suspects when it comes to enterprise technologies, he's going to talk about some of those emerging frontier technologies. And that's a passion of his and something he knows a lot about. So I'm excited to have Stuart on the show. So Stuart, thanks for being here today.
Hi, good to see you again, Sarah.
Absolutely. Now, I'm really excited to discuss this topic with you today because technology is evolving so quickly, and over just the last 10 years or so, legacy ERP and other business technologies have grown and evolved their functionalities while migrating to the cloud. And cloud-based technologies have become the new norm, and we are now seeing different types of emerging technologies speed to the forefront of society in a new way. So what are some of the frontier technologies that you are keeping an eye on as we progress into the future?
Well, I think that you can kind of split them into two categories. On the hardware side, we're seeing the re-emergence of wafer scale engine technology, which was a technology first proposed in about 1980. And what we're seeing with that is new companies coming along and producing chips that are the size of iPads. And now they've got trillions of transistors on one chip, which is way beyond what we get in our iPhones today. And I also have been reading about some organizations are now trying to create three-dimensional chips, so that rather than just everything being on one wafer scale, the chip interacts vertically as well as horizontally to include processing time. So I think we've got a few steps left, or a few tricks still up our sleeve in terms of the hardware technology. The other one that always probably makes a bit more news is quantum computing. I think quantum computing is probably there or not there, a bit like Schrodinger's cat, if you understand that joke. But on the technology side, things continue to accelerate, and that's manifesting itself in the software technology that's starting to underpin that. And we are seeing now more use cases across a number of technologies. Artificial intelligence obviously is one. The exploitation of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. Blockchain and cryptocurrency such as Bitcoin is another. And then, everybody's making a big noise about robotic process or automation or screen scraping, as I call it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to maybe dive in a little bit deeper on these ones. So you mentioned blockchain. I'd love to start with that one. And it sounds like blockchain is the basis of cryptocurrency, which is quickly becoming more and more popular around the world. So what is blockchain and how does that work?
Funny enough, when I gave this first presentation about a year ago, I had quite a lot of trouble explaining blockchain because I actually think there was no scientist in the world that really understood what it was. But I actually came across someone late last year who was actually able to explain it in pearls of one syllable and make it really easy, which was a godsend. So I'm going to try and just repeat what he said. And basically, a blockchain is a list of records that affect a sequential list of records that have had the timestamp of the previous block and the transaction data encoded by a cryptographic hash. And so once that block is in that chain, that cryptographic hash is repeated in the next block. So that if you try, and the next, and the next, and the next. So if you took this block and you tried to edit it in any way, then the cryptographic hash that applied to this block will change, which will therefore have changed every other block. So you know that this block has been tampered with and therefore is invalid. So the reason that's good is you've got a way of encoding data that you can always prove is the valid truth just by looking at subsequent blocks in the chain, and you can see whether it's tampered with. So in theory, it's a way of securing data that is unamendable. It's like having a image on a write once, read only CD-ROM. Once the record is written to the CD-ROM, you can't change it. Well, this is the same technology, but on a transactional basis. And it's becoming ubiquitous. I mean, now we've not only got blockchain and even comedy chains now. There's a few floating about that just seem to be based on cartoon characters, which strikes me as getting towards the left-hand side of bizarre. But even typical Elon Musk's girlfriend, Mrs. Grimes or Miss Grimes, I don't know what we should call her. She's been using non-fungible tokens. Now, who on earth ever thought non-fungible tokens was a good idea to call something? But that's a way of digitally certifying digital art as being true and original. It uses the same blockchain technology. And so once you have got a certificate that art is blockchain encoded, then you can never have a different piece of art that replaces it or replicate it, because the blockchain certificate would be different. So that's kind of what it is. It's mostly used in, the obvious place for this is in payments, because that's where this technology most naturally sits. So you find blockchain getting, bankers and investment organisations getting quite excited about blockchain. Truthfully, it's not a thing that excites me too much, so I don't lose any sleep over it. I think one of the interesting things about blockchain is that Bitcoin is that it comes into fashion and then goes out of fashion again. Elon Musk said that they will accept this Bitcoin for Teslas. And that lasted about 2 weeks, in which case the value of a Bitcoin went from $55 million trillion to $56 million trillion. And then 2 weeks later, Elon Musk said, "Oh, actually, I don't like Bitcoin because it uses up too much energy and it's contributing to climate change." So Bitcoin went from $56 trillion down to about £4.60, and so. I don't like it. It's just go away. So that's Bitcoin.
No, totally. There's, I think, a lot of mixed emotions and a little bit of confusion.
Well, some people have made some good money out of it, and good luck to them. You know, personally, I like to keep my banknotes under my bed. That's probably because I'm quite old, right?
It's like my dad. He definitely has got his like safe stash somewhere, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that though. Cash is king, right?
Absolutely.
At least in this day and age still.
Well, it will become the Armageddon or whatever it is, the Revelations. That's what I was trying to think of.
Yeah.
Day of Judgment.
For sure. And I wanted to ask you, like, how does the increasing popularity of cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin affect business around the world? Obviously, we mentioned Elon, but do you think it's in a business's best interest to begin accepting Bitcoin as payment?
I think it's patchy. I think it's a bit gimmicky still. You know, I don't walk in with my iPhone to Sainsbury's and say, "Oh, please, can I pay with 0.0000012 Bitcoins for my Mars bar?" You know, we're not there yet, and I'm skeptical that will ever happen. I think Bitcoin is the ubiquitous universal currency that may one day come to pass, but I still think it's quite a long way off. I mean, I think there's probably more chance of the euro being a successful currency than there is Bitcoin becoming the world currency. But there's a controversial statement, but we will see, right?
Yeah, definitely. Now, I wanted to transition to artificial intelligence. So AI is a concept that I think excites some and also terrifies others. So from what I understand, at its core, artificial intelligence is simply put as pattern recognition. So could you maybe give out your own definition of what artificial intelligence is?
Well, what's interesting, I think, is that the definition of artificial intelligence changes every time you ask anyone. And actually, there was quite a good quote that said something like, as soon as you say that artificial intelligence can do something, that is not therefore artificial intelligence, because now it's just intelligence. And so, you know, that's kind of, it's a bit of a moving goalpost. The question really is, what is intelligence? Because we had IBM Watson play Jeopardy between two human contestants, and the Watson won. Now, did it win because it was intelligent, or did it win because it had much faster powers of recall and deductive reasoning than a human? And is deductive reasoning intelligence, or is intelligence actually emotional knowledge, critical thinking, and a whole load of other things? And so, you know, you start to get into very dangerous waters. Another good example of this, actually, in about 1974-5, roughly there, I was about 8 or 9 years old. We went to the Science Museum and we looked at an old-fashioned computer. Okay, I was 9 years old and we're talking about 40 years ago, so these were really, really old computers. But one of them had a teletype and had a little game on it. And the game was quite a simple game. It was the What Am I game, which actually I still can't find any example of. It must exist somewhere, but I've been looking for a historical one to run on my own teletype over there. I've not managed to find one yet. But basically, the concept of the game is that you would say it will try and guess what animal you're thinking of. So it will say what kind of does your animal have 4 legs? And you'll say yes, and it will say, I think your animal is a dog. You'll say no. And it'll say, okay, what animal is it? And you'll say a cat. And then it'll say, well, what is the difference between a dog and a cat? What question could I ask that would differentiate a dog and a cat? And you say something like, I don't know, does it scratch you or something? And then next time you go through the game, it'll ask, what kind of animal are you? And you say, what are you, animal, fish, or mineral, whatever. Then you go, have you got 4 legs? And you go, yes. And it go, well, then go, does it scratch you? And you'll say, yes, therefore your animal is a cat. Now, is that intelligence? So I don't think that's intelligence. I think that's just critical think. It's deductive reasoning built into an algorithm in a computer. I don't think it's intelligent. But that's all a chatbot is, effectively. A chatbot is exactly that. It builds up a database of intelligence out of keywords. And when you type the keywords in, it gives you the answer. The problem is that 50% of the time, the answer is useless. And you still can't get to the human being who can actually solve your problem. Like, great example on UPS's website, I had to pay a customs charge. So I went onto the chatbot and said, I need to pay a customs charge. And it gave me all the instructions about how to pay the customs charge, except I didn't have an account. So I had to set up an account. When I set up the account, there was no way to link the account to the charge that I got in my hand. So I said, how do I link the invoice to the account? And it goes, here's help on invoices. Invoice payment is, and it was, useless. And was there any option to go, please speak to a human? No, of course there wasn't. So the chatbot just failed, useless. And that, unfortunately, that's still a lot of end user people's experience, is that the AI runs out of intelligence, unfortunately, pretty bloody quickly. And then you're left with the dumb computer and the frustrated customer who hangs on the phone for 40 minutes, listening to their stupid music while you actually try to speak to somebody who has some genuine intelligence as opposed to artificial intelligence. So those are the kind of, use cases that you're seeing AI come in a lot. But there are developments in AI. I mean, it's never going to be static. And some examples of that include things like, we already know fuzzy logic in AI, which is, weighting data rather than taking absolutes. So, is it hot or cold outside? Is a subjective question, not an absolute question. I mean, you could say it's cold if it's, 30 degrees Fahrenheit or 0 degrees. But in Siberia, that might be hot. Yeah, because -40 is cold, or Antarctica. So fuzzy logic is sorting out data based on weighting rather than absolute yeses or nos. And that's been around for donkeys years. But then you go on to things like artificial neural networks, and you try and put on a reasoning and inference engine in front of that. And a lot of what we're seeing in AI at the moment are inference engines, or trying to infer data from past patterns. You call it pattern recognition, and that's pretty much what it is. And even in the human facial recognition, that's pattern recognition to a very large extent. And so the way those work is that they work on statistical models, and the more that a model, the more the statistics they gather, the more the model tends to reflect the biases of the data that's going into it. And that produces its own problems, and those problems are things like AI bias. So, a university, this is a known case, a university created a model, and it used students from the university to create the base data for the model and do the initial learning. And most of the students who came forward were young 20x white males, because that happened to be the demographic of the university. I'm not sure if it was MIT or Harvard. It was one of those types of universities. And so the model then automatically had an unconscious bias that if you were old, female, or from a ethnic ethnicity, you were less likely to be successful in that model to profile correctly than you were if you were a white 20-year-old male. So there are all sorts of unexpected things that where we go through experiential learning, the way that they're programming the algorithms and the way that they're populating the data is much more constrained and much more subjective, and therefore you get unexpected results. And so the latest, I say the latest technology again, neuromorphic computing actually has been around since the 1980s, but they're now trying to create proper artificial, neuron-based computing that learns in the same way as a human brain. So it doesn't work on statistical models. It works on a reinforcement of a value and a belief, and so the stronger the link, the more insightful it becomes. I think probably that's quite a long answer, but the where that leaves us is that in our little world of ERP, there is a huge capacity for the technology to make a massive impact, and it has not even scratched the surface at the moment in terms of impact. We've got a little bit in terms of accounts receivable AI, that helps us find bad payers and manage those automatically. We've got accounts payable, OCR, invoice recognition. That's been around again since well before the year 2000. So that's not new, but actually now it's probably just about at the point that it's usable and valuable. But really, and I think the other one that's quite a good use case is in demand planning. So N4 have got a demand planning module that's based on AI. So I've been told it knocks everybody else's out of the park. So, lots and lots and lots of opportunities, not very much in terms of exploitation at the moment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's just so interesting, all of these insights about, shedding the light on what we're up against with these new and emerging technologies. So we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to continue discussing the progression of artificial intelligence and dive deeper into the power of robotics. So we'll be right back.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
So let's continue exploring these frontier technologies, shall we? So when discussing the power of artificial intelligence, there are certainly incredible benefits to adopting AI into business operations. And yet many people and even organizations are hesitant to accept and adapt or adopt this technology. So I'd love to hear your perspective on this. Like, what are the benefits of AI as it relates to business?
Well, the obvious benefit that all of the finance directors and the CFO likes is that potentially it removes headcount cost from the organization, because in theory you need less people to do the tasks that the AI is able to do for you without any human intervention. Now that's quite a difficult sweet spot to find, because a lot of organizations, they'll put in something like a chatbot or an accounts payable invoice automation tool, and then they will rapidly diminish the size of their AP or their call center or their HR team or whatever, and then find that there is a residue of inquiries that the chatbots will not be able to cope with, or invoices that can't be recognized and go too far, and then all of a sudden they're getting backlogs of problems or poor service levels or whatever. And so, the lesson there is, don't try and go too fast. Don't assume the chatbot is just going to learn everything on the first day, and the second day you can get rid of your complete call center, because that's, obviously not sustainable. I think the other thing as well, which drives me nuts, and it's just so dumb, is that they don't give any way, they don't link the chatbot to the ability to speak to a human if the chatbot has not managed to solve your problem. And that is so frustrating, because the chatbots can probably take about 40% of the traffic away from the call center. And there are some studies that say, it varies between sort of 40 to 50%. Some claim 60. Of course, the chatbot vendors claim 80% or 90%, and that's naturally rubbish. But if you get to the point at which you've got to the chatbot and you can't go any further, you then have to get on the bleeding phone and start faffing about with the phone. There's no, I've even typed into a chatbot, "Can I speak to a human, please?" And it does not compute. And it just is nuts, mad, stupid. Anyone who is doing chatbot, if you do that, you should be fired. So there are clear benefits to the organization. Yes, organizations are hesitant. If you're an organization that is getting 50 invoices from suppliers a month, does it make any sense to spend $100,000 putting in an invoice automation tool? No, it doesn't. So they don't. So there's one immediate, obvious use case where that's only going to be of value if you've got a very high number of accounts payable invoices that you need to automate. The same is true of accounts receivable. So if you've got lots of if you've got a small number of very high value transactions, then putting a tool in to try to automate those is going to be no benefit at all. They will work where you've got a large number of lower volume or lower value transactions that you can't have a human being eyeballing all the time. So you want to take all of the chaff away and focus on the very big outstandings to be dealt with by the humans. And in fact, we're doing that for a customer at the moment, and that's actually we're trialing that right now with a product called High Radius. So yes, people are hesitant about it. In some cases, you get resistance just because people think it's going to do them out of a job. And I said my personal experience is that they are not good enough yet to really drive significant headcount reduction. They will drive some, but it tends to be on the lower value kind of jobs and roles anyway. Not more what I would call complex problem solving roles. It tends to be more inquiry handling roles, and those, whether that's AI or whether it's just a vendor or portal or a customer portal, those are roles that aren't terribly rewarding anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can totally relate to those bots being super frustrating sometimes. You just want to be able to get to that person if it's unable to answer your question. So
yeah, I'm mentioning UPS by name because this happened to me about 4 weeks ago, and it was very, very frustrating. And so if you're watching UPS, just fix it now.
Yeah, Facebook's kind of the same, so I'll call them out.
Excellent. There we go. Let's even go down the A to Z of all great American companies and see if they meet our approval or not.
So annoying, especially when it comes to the Facebook ad side of things. That's where I've been having issues. But you also mentioned robotic process automation as one of these frontier technologies catching wind. So what is robotic process automation and how does that work?
It's a lot less exciting than it sounds, actually, but it has some interesting use cases, and I'll offer a couple up. In the 1990s, we invented something called screen scraping, which was a pretty horrible word. And basically what it did was that it recorded the interactions with a set of screen full of fields. And then it could repeat that interaction over and over again using different input data, as long as it knew what the data was and the context of it was. So you could use that typically, for example, to get your PC to interact with your IBM mainframe. but rather than see horrible green screen characters, you'd see a nice Windows interface with a drop-down list and what have you. And that concept was called screen scraping. So the enhancement to that is called robotic process automation, where based on a set of input data, that data can be input into the form automatically. So if I had QuickBooks, for example, I'm using that illustratively, it will know where all the fields in QuickBooks are. And if I feed the RPA tool the raw data of an invoice in a CSV file, for example, it will populate each of the fields correctly and save it and move on to the next one. And it'll do it infinitely faster than I can. Now, where is that useful? Well, we have a repetitive task of data entry over and over and over and over again, then RPA is an exceptionally useful tool. And in fact, RPA, so there are two parts to invoice automation. There's the OCR scanning and recognition part, which is I've seen an invoice, I understand what that invoice looks like, I understand where the data is, and I've extracted that data. So that's the AI part. And then the RPA part is I'm now going to take that data and I'm going to squirt it in directly to the ERP using the standard ERP form without you having to change the ERP. And in fact, you can go further than that with RPA because you could have two ERPs and you can say, right, if the invoice to address is company X, I'm going to send it to that ERP. And if it's company Y, I'm going to send it to that ERP. And I know, even though those two ERPs might be different, what the form looks like and can enter the data. So that's what RPA is in concept. Now, the most interesting use case, that's definitely a problem looking a bit for a solution, right? Because most people have got reasonably good automation anyway for their ERP. If they've got a way of squirting the data into an ERP directly through an integration, they already do. So the use cases for this are not nearly as ubiquitous as you might think, despite the cleverness of the technology. What is, though, quite interesting is the fact that a company that I came across actually through a LinkedIn conversation do a tool that is an RPA-based tool that allows you to repetitively build and rebuild your Oracle configuration from scratch. And it does it ludicrously fast. And that allows you to create a base Oracle configuration that will work almost for most organizations with you tailoring it. But as anyone who's ever worked on EBS or Oracle Cloud knows, it's an extraordinarily difficult and manual process to move a configuration from one environment to another. And if you schedule it with Oracle, it takes months. It's horrible and a shocking process. And this tool can do it in about 2 hours. So, you know, those are the little things that are useful to know, because, you know, those can save a lot of effort and time in an ERP project. And that's a great example of where that technology can really add some value. So, you know, like all of these things, I'm sure there'll be loads of people phoning in and writing in the chat, oh, we use it for this, we use it for that. And I'd love to hear that, because, as I said, the clients that I'm talking to at the moment, very, very few are using any form of RPA, despite the fact that it's now been around for about 5 or more years.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Super interesting. I wanted to ask, is there also an overlap, or can there be an overlap in robotics process automation? And
yeah, well, that's what I said about that's the use case I gave with the OCR, the invoice automation. The AI is taking care of the recognition side of it, which is recognizing the invoice and the text. And then the RPA is actually the part of it that squirts into the ERP. And some of them, again, most of them use a direct integration. So they will squirt it into the ERP using an Oracle connector or a NetSuite connector or a Dynamics connector that will send the data in XML format, in raw format, straight to the ERP. But you can get tools, there are one or two about, that you don't have to worry about the connector, you can squirt it into any ERP. And where that's a good use case is when you've got an ERP that nobody's ever heard of, that is, massively out of date, of which I'm afraid there are still, very many, thousands and thousands, in fact, of ERPs on the market, and 90% of them are ones you've never heard of before. Or sorry, 90% of the ones you've never heard of before, and half of those are out of support now. And so, if you wanted to exploit this kind of new technology, you wanted to do invoice automation, this is a great second alternative to ripping your ERP out and starting again.
Totally. Awesome. Yeah, that definitely clarifies. And do you believe that these technologies that we discussed today will continue to grow in their adoption rate like 5, 10, 20 years from now? Or do you think some of these will fizzle out?
Well, that's a really interesting question. The answer is probably, if you'd asked people in the 1980s whether PCs were going to become widely used and take over mainframes, they would have gone, no, never in my lifetime. And now, the mainframe is the thing that's stuck in the data center in the corner, and, people forget what that was all about. Now we have new mainframes called Google and Amazon and Azure. So, we've all moved on, and technology has moved on. And it's like the telephone, right? We still use a telephone. But the telephones that we had in the 1970s and 80s, were big plastic things with green handsets. And now, they're more like Star Trek communicators. So, it's impossible to say what technology is going to look like in 20 years. If I was to make a hypothesis, I think that the artificial intelligence will come a lot closer to what we would naturally believe to be real intelligence. Whether or not that intelligence will become self-aware, and then we'll try to pull the plug and it'll send off all the nukes like they did in Terminator, I think is probably less likely. And, are we ever going to see a situation like iRobot, where we've got robots walking up with the DHL parcel saying, here is your parcel. I'm sorry, I dropped it and I broke it for you, like they do for humans. I think that's possible. Likely, maybe, definitely, don't know. Who can predict the future? It's a bit of a reach for me to say what I think the next big thing is. I certainly think that we're not living in an environment that stands still. But if you believe Elon Musk, which I do religiously, obviously, then we're actually already part of an AI program that's already running, and actually we don't exist, even though I think therefore I am would tend to suggest otherwise.
Yeah. Totally. I mean, everything's constantly progressing, and only time will be able to tell, I guess. So, yeah, absolutely. And this whole conversation has been super, super informative. So I wanted to thank you for all of your insights today. Now, if our listeners wanted to learn more, what are some resources that you might suggest for them?
Oh, I'll tell you, actually, I mean, I read a lot of Wikipedia, actually, when I've got a downtime, and I will just see where all the links take me. So, things like we were talking about Turing machines and von Neumann architectures and things like that. And part of that linkage took me to neuromorphic computing and wafer scale engines. Solo paradox was something that I found out about a month or so ago and looked at that. And it really is a very good resource, and there's a huge amount of information that on Wikipedia that I would say 80% of which is pretty robust and pretty factual. Obviously, like, on the internet there are 11 billion things that are not factual and are complete rubbish. But in general, I actually found Wiki to be a good starter resource, and then it'll give you further reading, and that's when you can really get in and you can see what papers have been written and where it's all going.
Awesome.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
All right. Well, thank you, Stuart. That was a great discussion. Thanks for being on the show again. He's a repeat guest on the show, and he's a fan favorite. So always good to have Stuart here on the show. And we're going to wrap things up for today. And Paresa, thanks again for another great episode. We appreciate having you on the show, and look forward to seeing you next time.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me. See you next week.
All right. Thanks, everyone. And we'll see you next time on Transformation Ground Control.